Well, there was a misunderstanding about what the IDF's, the Israeli military's plan was in terms of retaliation. But what we do know is that Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, has given the green light for the military to do a complete and targeted retaliation. Obviously, they are headed for the heads of Hamas, a terror organization. They are headed for the tunnels, this intricate network, which is called the Metro, of tunnels that was built within Gaza to have access to Israel's borders as well. The IDF had tweeted out that they were going to send in ground troops. They put these ground troops on the border of Gaza, Hamas believing that they would invade on the ground. That hasn't happened yet. These have been aerial retaliations so far. And again, I have to reiterate, these were targeted. They're going for not civilians, but going for weapons depots, and they're going for areas where the heads of Hamas are. And again, this very intricate tunnel system to try to eradicate these methods of terrorism within Gaza.
Lisa, let's talk about amassing the troops at the border. It's my understanding at this point they have not gone into Gaza, and correct me if I'm wrong about that. And if they were to do so, that might be a step they couldn't come back from, and there are some other risks involved as well, because some of the other Arab countries there may decide to respond. Is that correct?
Well, they have not gone in. That is correct. And the reason for that is obviously they make their military much more vulnerable when they go in. Israel knows what it's up against. Look, when all the other terrorists go back to planning, Israel goes back to defending, meaning they have to be tip-top on their intelligence and all the ways in which they have to defend themselves from every corner, right? As you correctly said, they have Lebanon with Hezbollah in the north. They have Syria. They have Hamas, obviously, in Gaza. They have the West Bank as well. So they are surrounded in a very bad neighborhood, so to speak. They know what they're up against. So they're doing their calculations very, very appropriately. They have not gone in, again, that being a higher risk for the military. And because they know where these targeted areas are, they know where the tunnels are, they have mapped this all mapped out. There's no need for them to put themselves at an additional risk and to escalate the situation. The one thing that must be said that is missing from the mainstream media is to say that Israel doesn't want this. They want to go back to peaceful lives. I've spoken to so many people there, both civilians and people in the military, over the last 72 hours. This is not what they want. So, of course, they'd love for there to be peace, for there to be a ceasefire, for them to put their weapons down. But because they've already come to a place where they have to retaliate, they have to put an end to this round of escalations. That's what they must do. But let's not be fooled that there will be peace in this manner. This round of escalations will stop, but in a few months, will we see this once again? And that's the question that we have to ask. When you see the mainstream media and the coverage that they're giving, it's just unfair to look at the numbers of casualties, for example, as a litmus test as to who is right and who is wrong in this scenario. Israel is a country of civilians who are defending themselves, and Hamas is a terror organization inflicting harm and terror upon its own civilians in Gaza and as well in Israel. Their charter says they want Israel off the map, and they're up against a democratic state such as Israel. So these are important points to remember when looking at the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, we have about a minute left, but talk to us a little bit about those tunnels, because it's essentially a city underneath a city.
Correct. Now, I just want to go back in history just for a moment. In 2005, Gaza was cleaned out of all the Jews. They evacuated all the Jews to return Gaza to the Palestinians. Ever since then, they've used that as a launch pad to carry out attacks against Israel. They've given them basically geographic advantage to now have all of these attacks against Israel and to point their weapons at Israel and at civilians. This network of tunnels, it's called, again, the Metro, was built in the aftermath of the 2014 escalations called Operation Protective Edge. If you remember, that was yet another one of a scenario similar to the one that we're up against right now, where they were shooting in, Hamas was shooting in from Gaza into Israel. The Iron Dome protected Israeli civilians from a lot of casualties. It would have been much worse. But since then, Hamas has used this time to build this tunnel system because it works. It's underground. They're harder to get to. They can pass weapons through. They can pass terrorists through, and they can arrive at the shores of Israel very, very easily. So Israel is very fixated on eradicating eradicating these tunnel systems, on eradicating these terrorists, and eradicating Hamas.
Where do the tunnels go? Do they go all the way over to the West Bank, or do they just go into Israeli territory?
Yeah, they're mainly meant to go into Israeli territory. That's how they sneak operatives in. There have been attacks where they come right through and land up on the beach in Israel, for example. But these are dozens of kilometers, meaning it's a very, very, very intricate tunnel system in which they rely on. This is how they rely on to carry out these terror attacks. And again, we wish them well. We hope that they can understand, or at least the people, the Palestinian people, and here the mainstream media, the woke crowd can understand what we're up against here. These are innocent people, both the Palestinians and the Israelis, who are up against Hamas, a terror organization that will do anything in its power to kill innocent people.
Yeah, Lisa, you hear some of the squad, on Twitter talk about this and not necessarily really stand with Israel. Do you think that the U.S., is there anything that the U.S. should be doing? Do you think the Biden administration is doing its part? Israel's our strongest ally.
Yes, of course. And, it took Biden quite a few weeks to get that call into Benjamin Netanyahu. Not good optics, where we're reaching out to the Iranian regime daily to make sure that a nuclear deal goes through. So what you could be doing is putting more pressure on lawmakers and on the Biden administration not to get back into that Iran nuclear deal without preconditions, without pressing the Iranian regime on their support of terror, their support of Hamas. They're paying for those missiles that are falling into civilian areas in Israel. They must be stopped. They're paying for the Houthis in Yemen. They're paying for Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're paying for Basiji terrorists in Syria. We have to stop them. They're the world's biggest supporter of terrorism. They terrorize their own Iranian people back at home. They're terrorizing all across the globe. And the Biden administration should not be sitting down at a negotiating table in Vienna with them to strike another deal.